Hello, Fairview. It is a great opportunity that I get to interview a missionary that has joined me. I'm sorry that he doesn't get a chance to be with us here on Sunday as you're watching this, but they were able to stop in for a few days, and so we spent some time and got to spend some time with our families. And I wanted you to meet somebody, so would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Nate Tatman, and along with my wife Stacy and two daughters, Deleska and Emily, we are going to be heading off to Madrid, Spain at some point. Not sure when. At this point, we'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, it's so awesome to be here. We are here also with our older two daughters, Kayla and Aubrey. And it's been great to be here. You and I have known each other for quite a few years now in our different ministry roles and everything. And so I've been journeying with Fairview through TJ and my relationship and friendship with him. And so it's been exciting to been tracking with you and what's been going on here, but to actually finally be here and to get a tour of the facility and the church and the area and Seattle with the family. It's been really, really fun and so glad to be here.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for this time that we got and just on a personal level to connect, but to have you here on the stage and where we worship together. Today, in fact, is your daughter's, one of your daughters that's here with you, her birthday. And so we're going to get a chance to maybe have some ice cream and, just want you guys to know that, as you know a little bit, and we'll talk about this, is Fairview has a history for missions. Yeah. And so anytime that we get a chance beyond what we do, and some of the things you alluded to was Global Strategy Roundtable. And for those that don't know, I've kind of talked about that a little bit, is we get a chance to come together strategically, a bunch of missions pastors and mission passionate people that get a chance to not only empower and help speak into what Global Strategy is doing at the Church of God national and global level, but we also get a chance to help write documents and stuff for smaller churches, maybe that don't have missions pastors, or they don't know how to engage with missionaries, or how to do pre-field training, or how to get into the field, or lead a trip, or any of those kinds of things. That has been kind of a catalyst of education for us to kind of help get people engaged.
Yeah. So going back to the Missions Pastors Roundtable, it's been an awesome opportunity to, like you said, to talk about and understand what missiology means from a Church of God standpoint, but also what does that look like in the local church, and whether it's through local outreach or through the local church sending missionaries or supporting missionaries, supporting what's happening abroad has been awesome. So I know that Fairview has a long history of supporting missionaries and projects in Europe and the Middle East. So we are so thankful that you all have done that over the years and continue to do that, especially with your partnership with Patrick and Jamie Noctegal, who will be our bosses once we get onto the field. So in our role as Associate Regional Coordinators, we're going to be based out of Madrid, Spain, and but working with the 109 or so churches spread throughout the 14 countries in that region. Again, knowing that you guys have partnered with Patrick and Jamie, you've probably heard of a lot of the great things that Three Worlds has done and continues to do, especially when it comes to empowering young leaders in that region. And so kind of at a high level, just to share briefly, Stacy and I, that will be part of our responsibilities, coming alongside those young leaders, working with them, equipping through pastoral tools and resources, talking about church health, church multiplication, disciple-making tools, and so we're really excited about that and what all that is going to entail. So we're again so thankful for the heritage and the history that Fairview has and continues to have in missions in that region, that area.
Yeah, and one of the areas specifically in that region that goes back, obviously, the SCAGs and some of those things, pillars that come to mind in the mission field, but just most recently, even as the Oldhams were serving in Egypt. And I know that we've been able to support them as they've now come off the field. And so it's so great to have another connectivity piece, because that falls into your guys' region to still have that connectivity. And so I'm super grateful for that. And you know, really, you kind of talked about your roles, and you kind of talked about the 14 countries and stuff that you serve, and that you're going there as a regional coordinator. What else will be some of maybe those opportunities where you'll be engaging? I mean, part of your history that people wouldn't know is you've also worked with multiplication of churches and church plants. And so I think what's important for people to know, and you probably know probably closer to a newer updated number, but something like 2/3 of our movement exists outside of the United States numerically. And so when we think of the least of these and making an impact globally, some of our churches maybe don't have that numerical number, but overseas we're seeing such a great impact. Maybe, as people say, the least of these in the Great Commission. It says go into all nations, not some nations, not just the 14 countries you're at, but all nations. And so can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so going back to what you mentioned, we are, so I was on staff at County Line Church of God in Northeast Indiana, Auburn, Indiana for 13 years. 10 of those years I served as missions pastor and oversaw missions. And that's where you and I made some connections and contact as well with the roundtable. And then in addition to that, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have been working in the area of church multiplication. And not only was I able to come alongside in County Line, and we started 2 new satellite campuses, and locally, I also had the opportunity to work with our state ministry, Indiana Ministries, as well as Ohio Ministries and Michigan Ministries. Those 3 states came together and began to ask the question, how, not should we multiply, but how can we multiply? How can we change the landscape of our churches to where, to move from closing our church doors to now we are opening church doors. In regards to, we are closing more churches than what we're seeing started every year. And how can we flip that question and flip that switch? And so we started doing that. We started, churning those wheels and building momentum and doing that. But going back to where my future role is going to be at in Europe and the Middle East, I'm able to take those experiences back at County Line, Indiana Ministries, our Midwest Multiplication Initiative, and with some of those tools and resources and networking, able to share those with the churches and pastors in Europe and the Middle East. Because again, in Europe especially, the landscape of Christianity is seemingly dim. Given any country in Europe, and you're going to have between 0.25 to 4% of the population become or identify as evangelical Protestant Christians. And so you just begin to play that out when you are a minority group in a secularized post-Christian culture. The outcome can look very dim. Not too far different from what Fairview has probably experienced here in Seattle over the last decades. And so it's how can we, move our churches from looking and trying to protect ourselves. How can we protect ourselves? How can we stay insulated from the outside world, the outside culture, to how can we reach our neighbor? How can we, instead of being in this protective kind of mode, how can we now extend a hand? How can we help those in need? And through developing those relationships, begin to share the gospel in different ways. And so, again, it's doing that in a European context, a European culture, and we're excited to begin that journey. We're not coming over there with answers or all the answers, but we're coming alongside to listen, to ask questions. So for the last 10 years, as a missions pastor, we've really focused in that area in Europe and the Middle East. And so I've got a decade of history of building relationships with the pastors and missionaries on the ground. And so what I like to say is I know a lot going into this role. I have a lot of relationships, but I also know what I don't know, which means I know what questions to ask or to begin asking once we're on the ground over there. And so just asking those questions, how can we come alongside these churches and help them to fulfill the mission that God has for them, going back to the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, and going out into all the world, which also means across the street as well, and helping these churches fulfill that Great Commandment, that Great Commission in their local context.
That's awesome. What would you say if you had, now given that lens or that context, what would be something that you could help offer up to Fairview? Like, is kind of, again, not the European context that you were saying, but you just kind of touched on some of them, but really do you believe the key to kind of do that is, in my terms, kind of operating outside of our bubble and engaging with our community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's a congregation has to know the needs and has to know their neighbors. Just to get to know their neighbors. You know, we this is going back to my time at County Line. We opened up a campus in a neighborhood. There was a Church of God church that actually closed its doors, handed the keys to County Line, and said, we don't want this not to become a church. We don't want this not to become a Church of God church. So we can't do this anymore, but we're handing the keys over to you. And many of those people continue to worship at County Line and come alongside County Line. And so we did some renovation in preparation for launching this new satellite campus in that neighborhood. The renovation took longer than anticipated, which was frustrating, but it also gave us a longer period, a longer runway to get to know our neighbors. And I just charged our campus pastor with his core team, utilize Sunday mornings to get out and introduce yourselves to your neighbors, get to know them by name, get to know their needs, get to know their wants and their desires. Just to be a neighbor to them and introduce you. Don't ask them or invite them to come to church. It's just getting to know your neighbors. And then through building those relationships, having those conversations, their needs, their desires, their lack of various things are going to come up. They're going to spring up in those conversations. And then you can begin to look at, we as a church, that's something we can help out with or work with, or something that we can be a neighbor to in this community. And so it's just, how do we become neighbors? How do we tear down those barriers, those walls that in many ways we as the church have created and have created those barriers between us and our neighborhoods? How can we tear those walls down and get to know our neighbors?
Yeah.
And just starting out the conversation that way.
I've been saying one of the things as a reminder during this time is when Jesus is asked about what is the greatest commandment, and he boils them down, those 10, into kind of like the two pieces. Kind of love your God with all your heart, body, mind, soul, love him completely, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I say there's that, and then Jesus also speaks about our action piece, the Great Commission. So there's the greatest commandment and the Great Commission, our objective, wrapped into one. Well, I think that's great, because that's kind of what we've been talking about and where we have a desire to kind of engage with our congregation. And today, on Sunday, when this is being played, there's going to be an opportunity. And we've been talking about, last week I talked to them a little bit about 2 Corinthians 5:7. And really, in that passage, we're talking about walking by faith, not by sight. And so I know that when you look at these things, our eyes will tell us one thing, but our faith is prompting us in another way. And so I'm grateful that you're here to kind of share a little bit. And I wanted to know, what does that verse now mean to you in the context as you are getting ready to go with your family and launching out? What does that kind of mean to you guys?
Yeah, where do I start? There's a lot where we've had to step out in faith. And quickly, just kind of two stories where Stacy and I had to kind of cross that threshold personally in accepting this call to become missionaries, because as a missions pastor, I had every opportunity to become a missionary a lot sooner than now. But as we started having these conversations a few years ago with Patrick and Jamie, and just talking about what this would mean for us, I mean, I had every excuse in the book as to why this would not work for us and our family. And in some ways felt like Moses when God was calling him to go and lead the Israelites out of Egypt. You know, and Moses had every excuse in the book, and God just kept knocking those excuses down, and he had an answer, and that happened. I mean, that literally happened with me in terms of it wasn't God knocking them down, but God was using some other people in my life to knock those walls down, to say stop using your excuses to keep you from doing what He's calling us to do. And so that was one thing for me personally. Another thing for Stacy. You know, as a mother, so we have 5 kids. We have our 4 daughters and our oldest son who just got married a little over a year ago. And so for us to make a decision like this and to think about our 5 kids from the age of 24 down to 13, there are major implications for us to make a move. You know, we have our 24-year-old son with his wife, our daughter, whose birthday is today, Friday, when we're recording this. She's 22. We have a 19-year-old daughter, 16, 13. So we have many different stages of life and seasons of life. And so for Stacy, as the mom, the protector, and is like, man, what does this mean for all of our kids? And it's also one of those things where we always want that verbal affirmation from God before we do something. But rarely do we ever hear of somebody getting that verbal affirmation. You know, God, just tell me, what do you want me to do? What do you want us to do? Make this easy for us, you know? And we have all these signs. We know in our heart what we're supposed to do, but in our mind, we're like, So she was coming home, we were at home one night, and our daughter, Aubrey, was coming home from the youth group that night. And Aubrey started sharing with Stacy. It was too late. I was already sleeping in bed. So Aubrey was sharing with Stacy, and Aubrey didn't know that Stacy was kind of having this internal struggle, because it was at a point where we had to make a decision. Were we going to do this? Were we going to sign the papers, you know, to actually confirm that this was happening? And Stacy it was just like, I needed that one last affirmation from God. Well, Aubrey came home and talked about what the youth pastor's message that night came from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar. And basically, you know, they were at that point where they had to walk into that fiery furnace, or kneel down and obey and do whatever the King Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to do. And they were like, you know what? We cannot bow down to you. We're going to walk into this fiery furnace, and we know God is going to protect us. You know, they knew what they were supposed to do in their heart. And in their mind, they even said, even if He doesn't, we're still going to be obedient, and we're going to walk through that furnace, even if He doesn't save us. And that clicked for Stacy. Now, we're not comparing what we're doing by walking into a fiery furnace, but that communicated to Stacy, and she went back and studied that passage and everything. And it was like, you know what? We have all the answers that we needed to have in that moment. And it was, are we going to take that step of faith and cross that threshold, sign those documents, and put our faith into God and say, okay, Lord, you brought us this far. We can look behind us and see how you have guided our years of experience and different friendships and connections. We can see how you have prepared us for this. But there's always something about making that step into the future. And so, you know, Stacy came to that period of peace where it was like, okay, I know this is what God, you know, not just my heart, I know this is what we're supposed to do. Not my mind, I know. And it's through faith that we still didn't have all the answers. We still don't have all the answers. So that was kind of like our calling into this. And then COVID hit. You know, we knew there was going to be a level of faith and trust at, you know, just signing up as missionaries, but then to do it in a season where COVID, this global pandemic, is happening. And there was a period earlier this year in March where we were just about ready to go on our site visit. So our four daughters have not been to Spain yet, and we're about ready to move to a country they've never been to. You know, Stacy has been there once, I've been there a couple of times, but for spring break, we were supposed to go over there, the 6 of us, for a site visit. And probably about a week week and a half or so, a couple of weeks before our site visit was scheduled, we noticed, we knew that the COVID had moved into Italy and that cases were starting to go up there. We knew some things were beginning to happen in Spain, and then about a week and a half before our trip, it was very clear. I remember one Sunday I had started reaching out to some of my contacts in Spain and said, hey, we're supposed to do this trip. What's it like in Spain? They're on the ground. We understand the cases are going up. And that Sunday they said, well, kind of what we see, a lot of people are taking kind of like what we see now. A lot of people are taking precautions, wearing masks. So if you feel comfortable coming over, just wearing masks, distancing, you should be okay. Well, that was on Sunday. By Monday, I think their cases had gone up to 600. By Tuesday, they had doubled. By, as the week went on, it just blew up and they locked the country down. So we had built so much into this trip. So, one thing I didn't share, Deluska and Emily, we adopted them from Costa Rica 4.5 years earlier. And so to move to the U.S. and within about a 5-year period of time to move them to another country, as you can imagine, again, going back to Stacy's hesitation and mine, what are the implications of this decision with our family? And so we had really worked up this trip in terms of, we're going to be able to go over there and see our schools, see where we're going to live, we're going to be doing some fun things over there. And then all of a sudden, this trip gets canceled. And that was a devastating blow, but probably the biggest disappointment or frustration came when for about 4 to 6 weeks, we had no idea what our future was going to hold. I mean, we were within a few months, 2 months of us Stacy being done with her job, me being done with my job. We were going to do training in June, and we were going to be in Madrid by July. And COVID hit, and again, for 4 to 6 weeks, we had no idea. Were we still going to go to the field? Was this still going to be, part of our story as missionaries of moving to the field? And when were we going to be able to go to training? And and just all of these things hit, and it devastated us to not question what we were doing, but just questioning how is God going to work through all of this. And that period, that 4 to 6 weeks when our future was uncertain, it took an amount of faith, at least for me, and I know for Stacy as well, that we probably have never experienced before. And during that time, when we just had to totally rely upon God. The only thing you can do, other than pray and read your Bible and all that kind of stuff, the only thing that you can do is look back to see how God has brought you through times in the past where you've struggled, where life was low and circumstances were bad, and you were up against some things in life, and we could look back and see how God had orchestrated and brought us through those times, and just say, okay, God, you've brought us through times like this before. This feels different now, but we know that you're going to bring us through this. And so it's not easy, walking out this Christian life is there's never been a promise that this is going to be an easy life, but we've stayed the course. We've persevered. It's still kind of this ongoing battle in terms of the unknown of when are we going to go, how is this all going to work out. But at the end of the day, we continue to believe this is where God is calling us to. There's still a need, even now more than ever, for His work to be done in Europe and the Middle East, just as much as the coronavirus has impacted communities and churches here. I would say on a deeper level, it's impacted communities and churches and pastors in Europe and the Middle East. And so that need to continue to walk alongside with pastors and their ministries, their congregations, and being that support, it's so needed now more than ever. And so we're looking forward to that day when we're going to finally get over there and be able to kind of do that work on the ground that God is calling us to. So that's a very long answer to your question. So but wanted to share that context of where we're at and where we've come from.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, last Sunday I shared a little bit of not trusting in ourselves or our own vision and our own ability. In fact, I played a video about Drew Brees in '06, and he is faced with going and looking at New Orleans like 6 months post Katrina, and everything in his mind tells him and his wife, like, why are we going here?
Yeah.
And he's kind of reeling again from that as he just left the field with a shoulder injury, thinking he might not even play again. He thinks he's done, obviously, as a Charger. But I think God can show up in the midst of those. And I shared with the church that us coming to Seattle felt like that. Being in the first month plus of us being here, we get hit by this pandemic. We see things like Chop and Chaz kind of come up. And I guess the thing that I can say is, like you said, we don't have all the answers. In fact, I've said I don't even know all the questions still. Yeah. And so, I think God is really still in control. And we were talking about this in the car. This did not catch him by surprise.
Exactly.
And so I think, again, laying up our treasure, the action that we have is to lay that up in heaven where thief cannot break through and steal, and moss and rust and the rain that we get in the Northwest can't corrupt as well. But really being in the midst of that, and the other word that I can say is walking by faith, not by sight, is I said obedience. And I think that's why I was excited for you to share a little bit of that story, is the obedience that you're stepping into, again, not even knowing what that fully means, but saying, yes, God, I believe in you, and I know that you will make a way where I don't see a way. I'm not omniscient, I'm not omnipotent, I am not creator God, and this is not my role. So I'm grateful for that. Well, one last question I had for you before you get a chance to head on, is probably the most important one. As we continue to be praying for you and your family, how can we pray for you? I know as you get ready to leave here, you're going to continue your journey. You've been in this van driving from Indiana all the way here. And you're going to continue. And I know you have a training period in Denver and stuff, but what is one way as a church from Fairview that we can kind of partner, come alongside you guys and be praying for you? Can you just share a little bit how we can do that?
Yeah, so from here we're going to be going down to Centralia and kind of Portland, Salem, visiting with some friends and churches down there as well. And then as TJ mentioned, we're going to be going on to Colorado Springs where we have to do some training. So at least for the next week or so, as we continue to be on the road, just again, pray for travel safety for our family. Pray for me in living in a van with 4 daughters. I need lots of prayer, but no, it's actually been a great family time, throughout this road trip and coming out here. But yeah, continued travel safety, specifically in our move to Madrid, because Spain was so hard hit earlier this year. As they have opened up their visas and working with those who are living in Spain and need renewal, and that entire office or department has become so backlogged. And so kind of our next step, because we're really wrapping up our fundraising, this training, which I'll share just briefly about, we'll have that check marked, and so we're really just waiting for our visas. And the first step is getting our visa appointment. Well, there's no openings now through 2020. We're checking daily to see when 2021 might open up. Hopefully in January, there's some openings that can open up, because once we have our appointment, then it'll be about 4 to 6 weeks, again, depending on how backlogged they are. 4 to 6 weeks after our appointment, we'll get our visas and be able to travel. And so that's kind of the biggest thing hanging over us right now that we're constantly thinking about is, okay, when do we get our visa appointments so that we have a better time frame and when we might move? And again, moving a family of 6 over to Spain is not an easy thing. I can't imagine even just moving a couple of states over, but or I guess just one state over. But moving across the Atlantic with six of us with 4 kids. There's just so much to think about. So that would be a huge, probably the number one thing if you all could pray for us about just the visa situation, that God would continue, because as he has, we know he's going to be working through this, and even if by some miracle there could be enough openings for us to get in yet this year, that would be great. But we'll settle for maybe the first couple of weeks in January as well, if God would open up those doors. And then we have to spend 4 weeks at Palmer Lake, Colorado, at MTI, Missionary Training International. And that's primarily going to be Stacy and I and Deleska and Emily. And so for 4 weeks, we're going to be in this facility 5 days a week, talking about preparing us for cross-cultural ministry and living, and just emotionally, physically, relationally, what goes into that. Stacy and I will have a track. Deleska and Emily will be in the teenagers track. And so just wanting to make sure that we utilize that time as best as we can and get the most out of it, individually and as a family. And that'll continue to be a good foundation to build upon as we make this transition. And then probably the last thing is again, we were starting to say goodbye or preparing to say goodbye back in May and June. And so this has been the longest goodbye that we've ever had to do. And so even being back at home, which is great sometimes, which is Auburn, Indiana, not Auburn, Washington, but Auburn, Indiana, school's back in session there, and so the girls, all their friends are going back to school. We're not working at our job, so it feels like life is happening, and the Tatmans are just over here kind of sitting on the sidelines. And so we've said goodbyes, we continue to say goodbyes. It's like this long, drawn out, transition period, and so just continuing to find peace with all of that. That again, okay, God, we know that this wasn't a surprise to you. You knew this was going to happen. How can we, and this is probably for me more than my family, but how can we find opportunity to leverage our time here and make the most out of our time here, whether that be with our family or relationships, or how can we do some of our responsibilities that we're going to be doing over there? How can we do that remotely here, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of different things to be praying and thinking about for us.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you and really appreciate your time and stopping in. It's always good to catch up.
Yeah.
The running joke, a little bit is not only, your wife, your 4 daughters, and even the dog that you guys have is a lady. And so Nate's on the road with Nate and the ladies. And so it is great to have you. And like you guys were joking, from Auburn, Indiana, but when you put Auburn in it, used to kick to Washington. So I'm glad you get a chance to go and visit. You can compare notes on Auburn's. But we will be praying for you. We're so thankful. I know that specifically for myself, for what you're doing, that you're accepting this call and you're taking the dare, so to speak, to go and do what God has called you to do. And that even if that took others and himself to help remove some of those barriers, I'm grateful that you guys have done that. And so we'll be praying for you. And thanks again for joining us. And Fairview, hopefully you got a chance to not only get a chance to meet one of our missionaries that is through the Church of God, but just to hear their heart, that God is working through them, that they are living by faith and not by sight, and just some of the things that they go through and the equipping and empowering that takes place so that they can continue to do God's work. And so thank you for joining us, and God bless you guys.